So at this point, it might just be easier to follow along with me on the screen rather than doing the steps yourselves, because there's more to look at once you load your time series batch. We did integrate, as you probably saw while Jenna was loading her test batch, we integrated the time series template as one of the options that you load here under Submit Data Results. If you select this option and click Next, you'll be asked to browse to that CSV file that's saved on your hard drive that you populated with data. Before we browse to that file, one important thing about time series templates is that it has to be a unique name for your file, not only once it's loaded into EIM, but also in EIM data loader. It has to be unique among anybody's data batch in EIM data loader. So I strongly suggest using things like the study ID, the location ID, since those have to be unique per each batch, and then also some other identifying code. This is because of how the data is stored. It becomes very important that we can associate this batch file name to all of the records within that template. It's just how the data is stored. It has to be that way. So I'm going to rename this to something that I really hope is not already in EIM. That should cover it. And now I'm going to browse to that file that I just saved. Next, you'll be asked to identify the time zone that applies to all of those records inside this batch. And so your options are Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time, or Coordinated Universal Time. For this example, it doesn't really matter, but I'll pick Pacific Standard Time. And then it brings up the data file, and you click Import File. And this will take different amounts of time depending on how many records are in your batch.
Adam, what happens if your time series goes over a change between standard and daylight?
The question is, what if your time series data goes over the change between the daylight savings time? And in that case, some software will actually keep all of your data in one time zone. Some are being more sophisticated, and they'll try to help you and switch automatically. What's important that everything in that template is under one time zone type. And so you may have to create two templates for one deployment period, one for the daylight savings time and one for the standard time submittal. Not ideal, but this is the only way we could truly work it without having to add yet another field to the template that you have to populate and specify that data. So what it'll do is after importing, it'll create a batch metadata box where it shows which number of what the number is in your batch list, the date, the name, who you're submitting to, and then also the total number of records in the batch. And then you perform a check data back option, where it's going to run through some of the most common data checks. And we spent a lot of time developing these data checks, so they're a bit more rigorous than for the import of the check data for the result templates and the location templates. And if you do encounter any errors, one thing that we've added is a possible solution to fix that error when you get that error message. So hopefully, if you have any questions on errors, you'll have an explanation for what exactly is wrong with that data batch. If you do encounter errors at that step, you will need to fix them in your template, re-import the CSV under either a new file name or you'll delete that file name from your batch list so that you don't have two files named the same thing in the data loader. But all corrections have to be made in that template. You can't make any here in the loading environment like you can with discrete data. And it's based on the fact that we're summarizing all of this data and storing it in a separate table automatically. So this data checked out in this example template. You can see that the batch metadata is expanded. It includes now the study ID, the location ID for the batch, the study-specific location name, and actually, Kristen? would you mind making a note about the batch metadata study location name?
Yes.
This is really your study-specific location ID value. And in the old template, it was called study location name. We should fix that. If you submit multiple parameters, they'll be presented here just as a list. You will also receive a summary box here for any unique parameter and instrument ID combination that was submitted. So if you submitted water, air, and pH from a hydrolab, there would be 3 boxes here summarizing the data results that you submitted in this template. In this case, there's only temperature water data from this instrument ID. And you'll see the date range represented, the count of records, and also some summary data about the minimum value, average value, and maximum value. Here's the representation of the detected interval of your data set. Be sure to check this because this is calculated on the fly by the tool, and if you actually submitted 15-minute data, something is wrong with the times that you submitted in your data batch. Again, I noted that sometimes people will remove data because it didn't meet their quality assurance objectives, or maybe there was a true error in the data logging period. And we will detect those, and we call them data gaps. And if you click on this link, it'll show you the interval, the number of times that it was encountered, and the interval of that period. In this case, it was 14 hours when we calculated 30 minutes as the selected interval for your period. And the first occurrence was, in this case, at 11:30 p.m. on 9/11. For this example, I've submitted an observation to cover the logging period that was omitted and the reason for it, that there was a logger memory issue and there's a period where we couldn't sample anymore. So observations can be useful for describing data gaps in your data set in that way. And again, you can minimize any observations that you submit by simply clicking on the title of that box. The other thing that we have in this EIM data loader check data summary screen is the ability to chart all the data for these different combinations of temperature and instrument. If you submit multiple parameters, they'll be presented in this drop-down, as well as any instrument IDs. And it'll show what that data set entails. And you can effectively zoom in to areas in this chart to review them by simply changing the date period being represented. And click Draw Graph, and it'll zoom into that extent of that date range. I believe if you're under 500 records being charted, it shows up as a discrete point, and you can see up here when you hover over a point, the date, time, and value in unit of measure is represented. In this case, it'll also show any data qualifier. And this is that initial period in my example data set where I said it was in the truck. And you can see that it wasn't until here that it was deployed into the stream channel. So anyway, fairly useful tool. And once you have reviewed this information to be accurate, you can then click this button to submit the batch to the data coordinator. And it will go to whoever your specified data coordinator is in their batch list. At any point, you can submit to data coordinator, say if you didn't pass your checks, you can notify your data coordinator that you're having an issue. And there's a button for that as well.
Adam, on the submit to data coordinator, we talked about that a couple times today. Is that driven by the submit to field in your user profile or your organization profile?
The question was, is the data coordinator that gets notified of any batch submittal, is that based on the organization profile or the user profile? And it's based on your user profile. Yes?
Since these time series files can be unique, is there a limit on the file name size? I'm sure within reason, but
yeah.
I was just wondering if there was a character limit or...
The question was, because these file names have to be unique, is there a limit to the file name size? And it's based on your operating system.
Oh, okay.
File name extent.
So it's not limited on.
But it's not limited by
dash, viewer.
No.
I've never encountered.
Not that I'm aware of. It.
Oh, never happened. Wait.
All right. It's a challenge for all of you data submitters. Time series data. Let's break the system. Get Russ back down here. Are there any other questions about the notification? I will just show you all quickly. We have a batch file list for time series data that's very similar to the discrete results and the locations. We've added a few new icons for more clearly identifying the status of each batch, whether or not it's been passed and submitted to a data coordinator, passed if it hasn't been submitted to a data coordinator, successfully loaded, check data errors found. Hopefully these will help you kind of see what's been done in your batch processing steps. Again, you can view that summary data at any point. You can delete these batches from the options or export them out as a CSV, but you probably already have the CSV sitting on your desktop somewhere, so you may not need that option.